1887, Colorado Territory. The sun had barely crawled over the ridgeline when the wind picked up, dry, bitter, and sharp as a rasp. It howled down the scorched valley like a warning from the earth itself. A lone rider sat still on a ridge above the tracks. His duster coat flapped in the cold dawn breeze. Below him, what was once a freight train now lay in pieces across the desert floor. Cars twisted like broken ribs, metal blackened with fire. The smoke curled upward, choking the sky. Buzzards circled already. Thomas Beckett didn't speak, didn't move, just narrowed his eyes at the wreckage and clicked his tongue. His horse shifted, uneasy beneath him. And then it came, a sound, faint, fragile, almost lost in the wind. A cry, a baby's cry. Thomas's gut turned. Not fear, not confusion, just a feeling he hadn't known in years. Dread that meant something was about to change, something deep. He dismounted and drew the rifle from his saddlebag. The train had been robbed and left for dead, but something or someone had survived. Thomas Beckett had long since given up believing the world had any favors left for men like him. He was a blacksmith in a railroad town that was slowly drying up, like everything else west of the Missouri. He had calloused hands, a permanent limp from a Confederate bullet, and eyes that didn't smile anymore. 6 years ago, his wife bled out during childbirth on a winter night colder than hell. All he'd had left was their newborn son, Jesse, and a choice: run from grief or build something in its shadow. He chose the forge. Now Jesse was 6, sharp as a nail, and Thomas did everything he could to keep the boy's light from fading like his own had. They lived in a small clapboard house on the edge of Hollers Junction, a stopover town forgotten by the newer rail lines. Thomas hadn't gone to the wreck for salvation. He'd gone looking for scrap metal, maybe a wrench, a pulley, something to keep the forge running one more month. Instead, he found her, tucked inside a crate marked family property, private, padded with velvet, wrapped in silk, a baby girl. No older than 6 months. No blood, no soot, just wide blue eyes and a face clean as new snow. A gold bracelet shone on her ankle, small, delicate, etched with something he didn't recognize. She blinked at him, and then smiled. Thomas stepped back. This wasn't a rescue. It was a mystery, and he already knew this child was going to cost him more than anything he'd ever hammered on an anvil. He should have walked away. But Thomas Beckett wasn't built that way. He wrapped the girl in his coat, nestled her against his chest, and turned to leave when he heard the crunch of boots on gravel. He ducked behind a tipped-over coal cart, just as 2 men in railroad uniforms appeared at the far end of the wreckage. "Any sign of her?" one asked. The other spat. "Boss said she was in car 4. We were supposed to pull her before the explosion. She worth all this trouble?" The first man nodded. "She ain't just some kid. She's the claim. You hand her over, and you don't work another day in your life." Thomas held his breath, heart thumping. The baby stirred slightly. He whispered, "Shoo!" against her ear, holding her closer. The men turned the other way, searching through debris. Thomas didn't wait. He moved fast and quiet, slipping between the last 2 cars and back to his horse. He didn't ride the main trail. He cut through the brush and up the canyon ridge, rocks shifting underfoot. He didn't stop until the town came into view. At home, Jesse waited on the porch, barefoot and grinning. "Did you find anything?" Thomas dismounted, breath ragged. "Found trouble." Jesse's eyes widened when he saw the bundle in his father's arms. "That a baby?" Thomas nodded, lowering her gently into a padded apple crate. Jesse crouched beside her, fascinated. "She looks like a star." "What?" "Her eyes. They look like stars. Can I call her Star?" Thomas didn't answer. The baby giggled, grabbing Jesse's finger. A part of Thomas wanted to smile, but his instincts wouldn't let him. She was too clean, too alive. There had been gunfire and explosions, bodies and fire. And this girl, she looked untouched by it all. That wasn't luck. That was design. And that meant someone out there still wanted her back. That night, as rain began to patter gently on the tin roof, Thomas sat at the kitchen table, the baby asleep in a basket nearby. Jesse had fallen asleep on the floor with his toy horses, one hand still holding a blanket he'd tucked over Star. The fire crackled. Thomas stared at the bracelet again, etched with strange marks, too fine for cattlemen or farmers. Something Eastern, maybe. Or worse, something political. A knock at the door snapped him up. He grabbed the shotgun from behind the doorframe and opened it a crack. A man stood there, tall, dressed in oilskin, with a wide-brimmed hat shadowing his face. "Evenin'," the man said. Thomas didn't lower the gun. "You're not from around here." The man smiled thinly. "Don't plan to be. Just passing through. Heard there was a baby pulled from the wreck." Thomas kept silent. "Strange thing," the man continued. "Surviving something like that. You wouldn't have seen her, would you?" "No baby here." The man nodded slowly. "Well, if you do, you'd be smart to give her up. Some folks pay good money. Other folks don't ask so nice." He tossed a gold coin on the porch and walked off into the dark. Thomas stood in the doorway for a long time, rain wetting his boots. Inside, the baby stirred in her sleep, and Thomas quietly locked every bolt, checked every window, and set the shotgun beside his bed. The sun had barely lifted when Thomas loaded the saddlebags with hardtack, jerky, a kettle, and extra blankets. He strapped his old Henry rifle to the saddle and bundled the baby against his chest in a sling made from his late wife's shawl. Jesse sat in front of him on the saddle, clutching the saddle horn with both hands. They rode out before the town was fully awake, mist curling low across the rooftops like quiet breath. Thomas didn't say much to Jesse. He didn't need to. The boy could feel it in his father's grip, tight, urgent, unwavering. They passed the outskirts of Holler's Junction, leaving behind the clinking forge, the wooden church, the tired saloon with peeling paint. In its place rose the pine-thick backcountry, where the trees grew like guardians and the trails vanished into shadow. Thomas rode hard, steering them northwest toward Redstone Ridge, where only men with ghosts went to be forgotten. He remembered the last time he'd ridden that way, 6 years ago, with a pine coffin in the wagon and Jesse no more than an infant. He'd buried his wife under a gnarled oak just outside the ridge and whispered a promise to her and the newborn in his arms. "We don't run, not ever again." But now here he was, running, not for himself, not even for Jesse, but for this tiny girl in his arms, Star, who had survived fire, had the eyes of a sky before the storm, and wore a bracelet more dangerous than a loaded pistol. By dusk, the path had narrowed to a deer trail, threading through granite and cedar. The chill deepened, and snow teased the treetops. Thomas felt it before he saw it, a quietness in the woods that wasn't natural. A held breath. He stopped his horse and waited. Then from the shadows came the soft snap of a twig. A man emerged from the trees, lean and silent as a mountain cat. He wore buckskin, his long braids streaked with gray. A crude bone knife rested on his belt. "Wyatt." Thomas raised a hand. "I need a fire, old friend." Wyatt didn't answer, just studied him for a long moment. Then his eyes shifted to Jesse and finally to the baby. "She yours?" Thomas shook his head. Wyatt stepped closer, his gaze narrowing when it caught on the bracelet around the baby's ankle. He motioned for them to follow. The cabin was nestled into the cliffside like a wound sealed by bark and stone. Inside, it was warm, with smoked herbs hanging from the rafters and pelts lining the walls. Jesse lay by the hearth, exhausted. The baby cooed softly in Thomas's arms. Wyatt sat across from them, inspecting the bracelet beneath firelight. "These marks," he muttered. "Not tribal. Not military. What are they?" "Railway cipher," Wyatt said, eyes sharpening. "Used by the ones who own tracks, not ride them." Thomas frowned. Wyatt continued, "She wears the mark of the Van Cleefs. Steel barons. Half the Western Rail belongs to them." Thomas stared at the baby. "You telling me this girl belongs to one of them?" Wyatt shrugged. "Belong? No. She was being smuggled out. Hidden. This wasn't robbery. This was a message." Thomas's throat went dry. He had a blacksmith's hands, not a politician's. He wanted no part in power struggles or secrets carved into gold. But now one slept in his arms, back in Holler's Junction. Boots hit the ground hard. The bounty hunter returned, this time with 2 mercenaries and a ledger in his hand. He didn't knock on Thomas's door this time. He kicked it in, found it empty, and cursed. He made his way to the forge, where Noel, Thomas's teenage apprentice, stood hunched over the embers. "You know where he went?" the bounty hunter said. Noel stammered, shaking his head. The bounty hunter broke his nose in one swift punch. 15 minutes later, Noel was slumped against the wall, his hand crushed in a vice, muttering a single phrase, "Redstone Ridge." The hunter smiled. He paid 2 local bandits, with railroad scrip, promised more if they brought the girl back breathing. By the next sunrise, they were tracking Thomas through snow, bloodhounds in tow. They weren't chasing a girl. They were chasing a future and a fortune. That night, the storm broke open with a roar. Snow fell like torn lace across the ridge. Wind howled through the trees, and the cabin creaked like an old ship in a storm. Jesse shivered under a bearskin. His forehead burned with fever. The baby cried for hours, inconsolable. Thomas paced the floor, helpless. "I can't fix this," he whispered. Wyatt crouched by the fire, brewing a pine bark tonic in a clay pot. He said nothing at first, just handed the mixture over. "She's loud," he finally said of the baby, "but strong." Thomas fed Jesse the tea and sat beside him, watching the snow collect against the window. Wyatt sat down, his voice low. "You think you saved her, but sometimes, child like this, they come to save you." Thomas didn't answer, just tightened his arms around both children. In that small, silent moment, 2 broken men and 2 fragile lives, they weren't running anymore. They were fighting to stay. Dawn broke, red over the ridge. The sky painted like an open wound. The air was too still. Thomas stood at the window, his breath fogging the glass. The first sound came like thunder. Gunshots. Then yelling. Hooves. Footsteps. The crack of dry branches. "Get down!" he barked, pulling Jesse and the baby behind a storage chest just as a bullet shattered the window. Wyatt was already moving. He slipped out the back, like smoke, bow in hand, vanishing into the trees. Outside, the bounty hunter's voice cut through the cold. "Give us the girl, Beckett. Don't make it worse." Thomas didn't answer. He slid the rifle into position behind the doorframe, just like he'd done during the war. But this time, he wasn't defending a cause. He was defending family. He pulled a lever, triggering a set of bare spikes he and Wyatt had buried in the snow. A scream followed. One of the men fell, his leg impaled. Wyatt's arrow flew next, silent and deadly. One bandit dropped before he even knew he was hit. But there were too many. They forced their way to the cabin. The door splintered under a boot. Thomas fired, hitting the lead man in the chest. Another crashed through the side wall with a hatchet. Wyatt tackled him from behind, knife flashing. Blood sprayed the cabin floor. But in the chaos, Jesse had crawled too close to the fire. A shot rang out. Wyatt turned, shielding the boy with his body, and took the bullet in the shoulder. "Jesse!" Thomas shouted, dragging the boy to safety, and then came the bounty hunter, face blood-splattered, gun raised, eyes burning. "You have no idea what she is," he growled. "She's not just a child. She's a claim, worth more than you, your son, and this shack combined." Thomas raised the shotgun and pulled the trigger. The bounty hunter dropped, dead before he hit the floor. The snow outside was stained red. The baby's cry broke the silence. Wyatt lay near the fire, pressing cloth to his wound, grimacing through the pain. Thomas tended to him with shaking hands, sweat beading on his brow. "She's safe," Thomas said, voice hoarse. "That's all that matters." Wyatt's gaze drifted to the baby sleeping in Jesse's lap. "You need to know what you're keeping." He pulled a small piece of deer hide from his satchel and spread it out, a map of old territories and railway lines drawn in charcoal. At the center was a crest, the Van Cleef sigil. "I saw it once in St. Louis. Same as on her bracelet." Wyatt murmured. "That girl, she's Eliza Van Cleef, granddaughter to Thaddeus Van Cleef, Steel King of the West." Thomas froze. Wyatt continued. "Her mother died during the escape, probably tried to take the baby and flee from the family. But someone betrayed them. The train wasn't robbed for gold. It was hit to erase her." Thomas whispered, "Why?" "If Eliza lives," Wyatt said, "she inherits titles, land rights, votes on the railroad board, enough power to start wars." Thomas looked at the child, softly breathing, wrapped in his wife's shawl. She had no idea who she was, and maybe that was the only way she'd survive. That night, the cabin was quiet, save the pop of firewood. Jessie lay beside the baby, one arm protectively around her, even in sleep. Thomas stood outside in the snow, staring up at the stars. Everything he'd fought for, every scar on his hands, every blister and burn, he'd never meant to get involved in dynasties or destiny. He just wanted a life for his son. And now he had 2 children. Wyatt stepped beside him, stiff from pain, but still standing tall. "She's not yours," Wyatt said softly. Thomas nodded. "But maybe," Wyatt added, "she belongs to no one now, and maybe that's what saves her." Thomas exhaled through his nose, clenched and unclenched his fists. "What if someone else comes? What if they keep coming?" Wyatt looked at him with tired, weathered eyes. "Then we remind them what it means to lose something they want." The next morning, Thomas saddled up. He rode alone to the nearest postal station, a day's ride through cold, pine-shadowed valleys. Inside, he handed a sealed envelope to the clerk. "To the Van Cleef estate, New York. Tell them the girl is safe. That's all. No return address, no signature." He rode back home, burned the bracelet in the stove, and buried the bounty hunter behind the cabin. The baby would not grow up in a mansion. She would grow up in a forge, under wide skies and the call of wolves in the trees. Her name would not be Eliza Van Cleef. Her name would be Eliza Beckett. Some people find gold in the earth, others in the arms of a child with no name. But the real treasure is the choice you make when no one's watching, when the world isn't owed a thing. He didn't choose me because of who I was. He chose me in spite of it, and that changed everything. We see Eliza, now a young woman, standing beside an aging Jesse at the forge. They smile as sparks fly, fire glowing in the dusk behind them. A child's laughter echoes in the background. A home. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Tell us, what would you have done if you found a child whose name could change history?